3 more essential but outstanding qualities every yoga teacher needs. So let's dive right in. The first one is knowledge, is information, knowing your craft. That's the first one, but make sure you stay tuned for the whole video because the third one is the most important one. Hi everyone, my name is Jimmy Barkan. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, hit the notification bell, hit the like button anytime you're enjoying the video, and I really appreciate that. It really helps to boost us up in the algorithm. So knowledge and information. First of all, history is key. In the Barkan Method teacher training programs, we really accentuate the history. Knowing where you are, knowing where you're going to, you have to know where you came from. And you have to make this choice too. Are you a yoga teacher just to lead an exercise class? Because then this really doesn't matter. You can go ahead and just do your cues and lead your people through your motions, through your postures. But if you're a true yogi and you want to really dive into the deep, rich knowledge of this 6,000-year-old science and communicate that to your students, then this video is really important because you have to understand the knowledge, and knowing the history is key. From the very beginning, 6,000 years ago, all the way through to modern day times and how the evolution happened. You ask any top person in their field, and I've talked about this in other videos. You ask Tiger Woods, who's won all the major tournaments in history, he can tell you. You ask LeBron James, who has won the most NBA championships, he will tell you because they are students of the game. They immerse themselves into the subject. Now, one of the best books you can buy, in fact, it's our textbook in the Barkan Method Teacher Train Program, is The Yoga Tradition by George Feurenstein. It's actually pronounced Georg Feurenstein. And in that book, you can delve into the history of yoga. So if you're a yoga student or a yoga teacher and you want to go far beyond just the exercise of the yogic asana and become a real yogi and dive into the rich history of the subject, and that's why I created the Barkan Method online teacher training program, because now on your computer for lifetime access, you have all this information at your fingertips. It's hard to retain that information, even doing multiple trainings and any type of yoga that you do. Now with technology, it gives us more access to all this information, and knowing your subject and knowing your craft will set you apart. And now that brings us to the second quality, and that's communication. Now that you have all this information, how are you going to communicate the information to your students to be more effective and advance their yoga career and help to enrich your own teaching and understanding of yoga? So communication is key. I recently did a video on using the voice, using your projection to get those words out. But it's not just about projecting loudly across the room, because then once again you're just choosing to be an exercise teacher. It's really understanding the information and then explaining it, and what I call the conversation voice. So we have a teacher voice that gets us through the transitions. Inhale and reach into the next pose. These are transitions. You can use your teacher voice. But when you're now ready to set up the foundation for that particular pose, now you got to get into the conversation voice. Now you want to get into the explanation voice. And one of the ways you can do that is recording. Another way you can do that, again, you can go into the Barkan Method course, because that's one of the things that I do. That's my passion, to get you to find your authentic voice and coach you to get to that point. Because it's real easy to say, okay, now get conversational, now find your conversation voice. When it's actually put in practice and you've got a group of 30 people, that's a lot different. And one of the reasons why it's difficult, because it's vulnerable. It's putting yourself on the line. So you have to be vulnerable enough to put yourself on the line to get your personality out there, because that's key. Putting your personality out there makes you authentic and makes you unique. And you don't have to be serious all the time. That's part of the communication. You can be entertaining. One of the most extraordinary teachers that I've ever experienced was a guy named John Friend. He created Anusara Yoga, and he would have his class in stitches. But every time they would laugh, or every time he would go off subject, he'd bring him right back on purpose. That he was a master at that. He would set them up and entertain them. They would laugh hysterically, and then he'd get right back on purpose. But I saw him at the Yoga Journal conferences, and I was mesmerized by his personality. And part of it was he was entertaining. And there was no one more entertaining than my teacher, Bikram. He would always talk about India. He would talk about different restaurants that he went to. He was extremely entertaining. People would be laughing in his class all the time. Yes, he would get very much on purpose, and yeah, he would kick your butt every time, and he'd get serious, but he also would make it fun and friendly. And I believe that's what made him famous in Beverly Hills. That's really started his career. Not that he was screaming at people and getting them into this disciplined practice. He was creating his phenomenal results physically, but he was so entertaining. So here's an interesting story about Bikram. Nothing to do with yoga, just a little bit about Bikram's personality. He always had to find the best. God forbid you were to suggest something that was better. So we had an argument about who found the best Chinese restaurant in Los Angeles. So we decided to put it to the test. I took Bikram to my restaurant. He took me to his restaurant. So we go to my restaurant first, and we sit down. We ordered all the different dishes that I loved. And I said to Bikram, so, Bikram, what do you think? And he goes, and I was all excited for him to taste it. And he goes, nah, wasn't very good. Mine's so much better. All right, a couple months later, I bring a couple of my students with me to LA, and I used to go there 3, 4, 5 times a year. So we go to his restaurant this time with my students and his wife, Rajeshri, and we sit down at the restaurant, and the restaurant was in the middle of Los Angeles, and one of his students was the owner. And they had one of those lazy Susans, and I remember those in the old Chinese restaurants. It's a big turntable thing in the center of the table. So all the dishes would be on this lazy Susan, and you would turn it to whatever dish you wanted to put on your plate. He says, so, what do you think? And I went, just to get him, because I knew, first of all, his restaurant was great, so was mine. One wasn't necessarily better than the other, but I wanted to get under his skin because he did the same thing to me. So I said, nah, didn't really like it very much at all. All right, so now, especially because my students were there, it upset Bikram very much. And he wanted to show me that I couldn't talk to him like that. So he calls over the owner, who was his student, and he says to the owner, who's in the kitchen tonight? And he says, I don't know, some name. I don't forget what it was. He goes, and the owner says, why? And Bikram says, because, and excuse the language, because it's not my language, it's Bikram, but if I use the word, I think it'll make the story more authentic. So Bikram says, this is shit, and this is shit, and this is shit, and this is shit. And as he's saying that, the owner's picking up all the plates, one after the other, putting them on his arm. He's got 6 plates on his arm, and the owner starts walking toward the kitchen. And halfway to the kitchen, Bikram yells out across the room in the restaurant, just don't bring us any more shit. Bikram always had to find the best. That's for sure. Don't, God forbid you challenge him. So back to number 2, the communication and being entertaining. Here I'm hoping I'm entertaining you right now. So yes, entertaining the classroom is important. Getting the words out in an explanation, conversation voice is important so that you're now bringing an energy to the classroom. Not just screaming out bullet points across the room as an exercise teacher, but really understanding your craft, knowledge, and communicating that information to your students. And that brings us to number 3, which is the most important one of all. We have the knowledge, we have the communication skills, and now what has to be the subtext, what has to fuel those words is your passion. You've got to bring passion to that yoga room every time. I've been teaching now for 42 years. And if you take my class now, if you took my class 10 years ago or 20 years ago, my passion level is the same. Maybe it's increased over the time. Sometimes you can fall into a rut, especially if you're teaching lots of classes, but you have the passion underneath to fuel the words that you're saying. Now it makes all the difference. We have an exercise that we do in our teacher training program, how people go around the room and in 30 seconds say, what's the one thing that touched your heart to be a yoga teacher? And they all would share these wonderful stories about their own personal experience in yoga. And I said, that's the subtext. That's the passion. Now, your students have to hear that. They have to hear those stories, but they have to hear the passion behind the stories that made you a yoga teacher in the first place. So let's sum it up. We've got knowledge and information and learning and knowing our craft, knowing the history, knowing the mechanics. Number 2, we got to communicate that information in a way that's effective, entertaining, and fun. And number 3, we need to find the passion behind the words, the subtext, to bring that information out and now to inspire your students and inspire yourself on your yoga career in sadhana. So that's our episode for today. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Jimmy Barkan. I've been teaching hot yoga since 1981. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, hit the notification bell, hit the like button, share it with your friends. And I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you at the next video. Bye, guys.